Well, welcome back to another episode of the Addy Hour. As always, it's my pleasure to be able to host these conversations. And I know I share this often, but it's always so encouraging to hear how you all as listeners are really engaging with the conversations that we have on the podcast, the feedback that I'm hearing from you all in person, and just be able to share, to be honest, to be able to share clips from different podcasts and different venues and avenues and places where I travel as well. So I guess this is a way to say thank you for your engagement. I hope these conversations continue to inspire you and continue to challenge you. And within that framework, today we have a great conversation on belonging with none other than Kim Samuel. So I'm going to go ahead and give Kim just a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll jump into the conversation. Kim is an activist, an educator, and a leading voice in the global movement for belonging. She founded the Samuel Center for Social Connectedness, which works with advocates and researchers to fight social isolation and build belonging around the world. She's a visiting research fellow at Green Templeton College, a visiting scholar at the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, and the Fulbright Canada Ambassador for Diversity and Social Connectedness. Kim is also the author of On Belonging, Finding Connection in an Age of Isolation, and this is an exploration of the crisis of social isolation and our birthright of belonging. So things that are very important and timely. I'm sure that you all are already very eager to hear this conversation. So with that, I'll say thank you to Kim for being here. It's wonderful to host you on the Addy Hour podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And thank you also to whoever is listening. Appreciate that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, as my listeners know, and as I mentioned to you, we always just like to start with a check-in question just to see how people are doing. I know you are a world traveler in some senses, as I mentioned in your bio. So just want to check in and see how you're doing at this point in time.
I'm doing well. I'm feeling very blessed. I just got back from a trip to Canada, where I'm from, for my granddaughter's second birthday.
Oh, wow.
Which puts everything in perspective every day. There were also a lot of fires burning across my country and a lot of smoke in yours. And that made me really aware of how precarious our life on this planet is, all life on this planet is. And I was reading this morning, actually, I read Father Richard Rohr's daily messages. So as you would know, a Franciscan monk and has a center on contemplation in the US. And today's kind of get one set for the day. It was about the first Bible is nature. And it made me think about this. And I'm in London, England right now, and feel like I'm sitting with you in Connecticut somewhere, and it feels good to be connected.
Well, thank you so much for that. I mean, so many pieces that you have shared so honestly, and as my listeners often know, it's very encouraging to hear the ways that people are able to hold all those pieces together, the joys and the challenges. And I think for a lot of us, it's really important to be able to voice those things and not feel like we have to pretend that things are going well or better than they are or worse than they are, but really have that whole perspective. So I definitely appreciate that as well. And as we jump in, I mean, this whole topic of belonging, something that we've heard a lot about recently, but something that you've been thinking about for quite a while. But before we get there, I was actually going to have you share with our listeners just how you came into your vocation, and maybe to talk a little bit about what you do on a day-to-day basis. People may have heard your bio and say, okay, what does that actually involve?
Well, frankly, when I was raising my daughter, who's the mother of Charlotte, I would always be stumped when she asked me, Mom, what's your work? What do you do? And I was thinking, I still do. Well, I fill up every day. I consider myself a hard worker with a strong work ethic. But when she was growing up, especially in the teenage years, I wish I could say, honey, Mom sells shoes. That would be a job that would be very specific. But and I see it as a mission. I almost was going to correct myself and not say mission, but it really is my mission, is that no one should ever have to feel as though they are sitting alone at the bottom of a well. And for the first part of my how do I explain what I do career, I was focused on trade negotiations. And then the question arose in me is, why are the most important things often left out? Why is labor left out? Why is environment left out and given side agreements? Why do we talk about economic growth so much? Good thing, but what about people who are experiencing poverty in many different dimensions? That led me to the next part of my career, which was working with a number of environmental organizations. It wasn't called climate change at the beginning or global warming. It may have been called acid rain at one point and moved on, but we're talking about our relationship and our obligations to Mother Earth. And then from there into why is it that people who are experiencing poverty told, this is what you have to do, and this is the rules and so on. And someone will say, well, yeah, I'm just trying to put food on the table. And how is it that these two things can't be looked at together? Well, of course they can. And that comes to what you talk about how important it is to have a view around wholeness. I feel the same, and I'm giving you about a decade at a time here.
That's good. That works.
maybe 2 decades at a time, but we'll leave that alone.
Yeah.
And then we're kind of bringing things forward to 1997, and in 1997, my late father, Ernie Samuel, had a brain injury out of the blue, and perhaps today. Science would no doubt say it was this and this and this and this. We don't know what happened, but what the result was that my dad was in a coma for 3 months.
Oh my goodness! And
that was, I hope everyone or most people anyway say about their dad, best dad in the world, and I really mean it. I really mean it. And this was devastating. We didn't know if he was going to wake up.
Wow.
And some days I'd pray that if he wasn't going to wake up, could the angels come and take him home? But he did wake up very slowly. He had a lot of different disabilities, physical disabilities, cognitive disabilities, and so on, which he hadn't had before. And I'll leave that for a moment and come back to why that's so significant in terms of social isolation, because I also want to point out that he had just turned 65 years old.
Oh, wow.
A couple of months before. So when it was time for him, we would think logically to go to a rehabilitation hospital. The insurance company said, no, not $1. And the reason was, and I'll answer it, but I bet all of your listeners would answer it for me at the same time, because he was 65 years old and therefore deemed to be in his sundown years and therefore not worthy of the cost of rehabilitation. And in that moment, that struck me as an injustice for anybody in this situation. Now, our family, we were very fortunate. And I want to be clear about this, that my mission is that no one should have to be fortunate enough to have enough money to pay for their family member to get standard of care. Everyone should have that. And that's an obligation that I feel to try to do something about. So Dad came home to Canada. He was actually in a rehabilitation hospital in Chicago at the time, and came home. And it seemed that the better that he got in terms of learning new what he could do, as he said, what doesn't work anymore. None of us who loved him or knew him ever saw him as diminished in any way. That doesn't mean that he didn't suffer a lot and that this was really hard. But this is what I want to say. I realized it wasn't the disabilities. There was lots to learn. He was not diminished. He was whole as ever. In fact, mighty, and just kept, that resolve of, it sounds corny, but as you get older, 1 foot in front of the other, actually, or 1 step in front of the other isn't corny anymore to me. It's like just 1 step in front of the other. But what he had was a real strong constitution, if you will. He wanted to be here, and he had grandchildren then too. That might have been a big motivation. He said, I'm going to fight my way back. It was the way that he was treated because of the disabilities. And And I kept seeing in my mind's eye, and frankly, I do every day when I wake up, because this is present, is a figure, a human being. It never looked like male or female or my dad, but sitting all alone at the bottom of a well. And I saw that as a very clear image. And I thought to myself that this isn't, went back to things I'd done, this isn't about the poverty. It's the way people treat people because they're poor. It's not about someone who's experiencing homelessness or incarcerated. It's the way they're treated because of that. And I thought a lot at that time about what is othering. And I was I have a great appreciation for Toni Morrison and her writing. And as it happens, she gave an amazing series of lectures many years ago. I think it was at another university at Harvard about othering and this tendency. And I guess another way to put it is to dehumanize one another. And it wasn't that I wasn't aware. It's that it's just somehow how it is, when something happens in your family or close to home, it just hits you on such a strong visceral level that it kind of opens up your eyes, which is not to say, oh, if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be doing this. It's terrible that happened. But when it did, I thought, well, what can I do? So that was the first part of it. And then the second part of it, my kind of awakening story, I got to meet Nelson Mandela, which in itself would be, I could tell you, I got to meet Nelson Mandela, but there was a conversation too. So my dad passed in 2000. And in 2002, I was in New York City. I'd been invited to a dinner in honor of Nelson Mandela and Gracia Machel, who both of them are to me amazing beacons of light. And I'd met her a couple of times previously. So she was introducing me to her husband. And she said, how have I been doing since my daddy died, as she put it. And I said, what you would imagine. I really miss him. Feel him. I do feel him with me all the time right now, for sure. And she introduced me to her husband, and she said, how would this change? What had happened? This experience changed me. I said, well, it's that the work that I've been doing before, when I was not selling shoes, is that I looked back, I thought there's social isolation everywhere. And I see that bound up in loneliness, and I see that then in what keeps us from our belonging. But that conversation was on isolation. So I looked to Nelson Mandela, and I was quite in awe, nervous, sure. all those things. Like, whoa. And I said, of course you would know all about isolation. To which he said, no, I've never been isolated. And at that point I thought, oh man,
you probably didn't want to hear no as your first
5
reaction.
seconds or less. How? What's the expression? Things were going so well. But I did. I had the courage to try again. And I said, not even in Robben Island, where, as you know, he was incarcerated for 19 out of 27 years of being incarcerated and really isolated from everything, even I should say, even especially seeing children. And there was at one point a way that they got guards to walk and hold, by with children on a Sunday, but really devoid of everything except connection. And he said, when I said, not even in Robben Island, and he said, no, because in Robben Island, we were all brothers working together with a common purpose. I was never alone. We were all brothers working together with a common purpose. I was never alone. I just want to repeat that because it's so powerful. He then went on to say that he had seen isolation. He'd seen it in a child in a village who has AIDS, who no one will love or care for or feed and so on. And I have seen isolation, he said, and it is very bad. And and that was, and thank you. What an honor to meet you and all of this. That was the conversation. But
Wow.
for me, it was, you celebrate the 4th of July, right? There were no fireworks. There was none of that. There was, for me, this sense of peace washed over
Mm,
me.
mm.
And this quiet affirmation came up for me. Oh, okay. This is what I'm going to be working on for the rest of my life.
Wow. Wow.
And
That's
that's
so
it.
powerful.
And it's turning out to be true.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely seems to be the case. Well, I mean, such a rich history, and also just appreciate your level of vulnerability and talking about the events that happened along the way. But it seems like all along the way, you were really watching and observing, even as you started to notice it wasn't necessarily the specifics of what people were going through, but how they were being
Yeah.
treated, and then just being open to that, and even being open to some correctness in that brave moment when you had the
I
introduction with
know.
Nelson Mandela, and we're able to take that and still engage. I mean, I think that's very instructive for all of us, for students
Yeah.
especially.
You know, I just wanted to pick up on something that you just said
Mhm.
about how that's kind of we're talking about my journey, but it's in all of our journeys. I
Mm,
think I feel that the path is already there.
mm,
We'll meet the path when it's time.
mhm,
I feel like that, but it really wasn't until some years after that when I first got to teach, and I got to create a course at a university in Canada called McGill University,
mhm,
all about this social isolation and connectedness and belonging, and what's the relationship to
mhm,
virtually all aspects of international development. I just wanted to share with you that
mhm,
that may have been my epiphany, what I just
mm,
told you. My dad was the inspiration. But when I went to teach, which that when you vocation,
mhm,
I really feel myself as when I found that oh, this is my vocation. But I was walking around the campus one day, 3 weeks into teaching, hadn't done it before. So
mhm,
again, kind of getting my bearings, and I was so happy, like so happy. And then I just was overcome with sadness,
mm,
and so much so that I had to sit down on the nearest bench and just what's going on. And
mm,
I just sat with it for a while, which I think is always the hardest thing to do.
mhm, mhm.
And I realized that I had just, in some way, encountered, going back many decades, my 21-year-old self. And
Wow.
she was, we say university to, we say college, but
Mhm,
um, so feeling so like she didn't belong
mm,
and so isolated, but always she being me, I'd put on this happy face because no one wants to see anyone sad. You're not going to
mm,
make friends that way and all of it. And
mm.
I felt like, oh, I'm not just here to teach, I'm here to heal.
Wow.
And that when you mentioned about vulnerability, it kind of made me think about with students that in the nature of my topic. And
Mhm,
as you might not be surprised to hear, I had office hours every day,
mhm.
whoever wants to come in. So students were sharing a lot that wasn't just about what was going on in the
Right.
class. And I thought, I need to meet them where they are. So there's a way, slowly but slowly, at least I find that, I don't know if it's that your life I don't mean unravel, but it reveals
Mhm,
itself to
mhm,
you. And you see that all along there's a tapestry that's being knit together. And
mm.
then every so often you get a glimpse of it.
Yeah.
So for me, I don't think it was only what happened to my dad
Mhm.
and also what Nelson Mandela said. I think maybe I was heading that way all along. I
Yeah.
like to think that.
Yeah. Well, that's outstanding. Even as you're talking, because I'm thinking about the book that you've written on belonging, your role in
Yeah.
the classroom, and not just in the classroom, as you mentioned, but also outside of the classroom, the center that you started, the fellowship programs and things that you have. I wonder if you have a perspective, because you talked about the journey unraveling. Do you see any role in terms of guiding, shepherding, or helping people to notice that journey along the way, or anything that you'd like to share? Because
Yeah.
that's just something that came to mind as you were talking, because it
Well,
seems like there's a lot of that you're doing to help people see that as well.
I see myself as a passionate messenger of a powerful message.
Mm,
And 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 that really, I'll give you a bit more, it may not really answer your question, but that's what came up in me,
mhm,
is that I'm not here to this isn't self-help. I'm not here to tell anyone what to do or how to fix things. Or I think if you are a person of faith, which you and I talked about, we both are, that gives us a pretty good center. But that isn't really, whether you are or you're not, I think that we really have to be there for one another to find our own ways forward. And so what does that mean in terms of helping? Well, I think it means reciprocity. It means there's a wonderful book, I think, called The Gift by Lewis Hyde. And if I should tell you, in my book, no publisher would let me write about faith or religion, but I was able, that's another thing.
Yeah. Wow.
But I did get in some mythology, had to work at it really hard.
Oh my goodness.
But I talked about Lewis Hyde, and he wrote about the gift, and the gift, whatever the gift is, a gift always has to keep moving. And I took that in my book, and now take that as my inspiration, that we all have gifts. So whatever our gifts are, they're there. And we want to nurture our own gifts. But in order to do that, we have to be giving and receiving all the time. And that the solutions to problems, any problem I can think of, it's the people that are experiencing that mostly will have the solution. And if you commit to that belief, as I do, then it puts you in a very humble and correct place, which is, I am here to hold a space, but to hold it intentionally and every day, and feel joy that I no longer have to think about what I do, because it's what I feel I'm being called to do, which is different. And to be able to make that space as safe and as deep or as wide, how a circle keeps expanding, so that people can come in and sometimes hold the space for someone else. So we talk about, resilience, and I bet you've talked about resilience in
Definitely.
your program. Yeah. I want to listen to all of the other ones now, but I believe that in life, even the most resilient person is going to have a time where they don't feel so resilient. Maybe it's my dad, I go, he sure didn't feel very resilient after everything he went through. And I think that was a hard thing to learn, he really needed to rely on us. But you see, we all relied on him. And I think that's quite important, that we're not all having the same amount of resilience at a different time. And that if you get, that expression, getting the wind knocked out of you, it's going to take a while to catch your breath. So what do we do when that happens? What does that mean? Well, it means that if somebody's family member is in the hospital and they're not getting the care that they need, then let us, who are their friends or care, or may not even know them, go in and advocate, because they need to be with their family member right now. That would be a specific example. Or if there is someone at work, and even though their workplace has the best DEI rules, or they've even adding belonging, the thing is, I go back to, the rules are good. Be careful about the measurement, because you may set up to measure exactly what you want to measure.
Right.
And if someone comes into work and feels marginalized, and for any number of reasons, if that's how they're feeling, then they are. And so it may matter most who's the hand on their shoulder, figuratively or literally, that doesn't say, hey, I'm with you today, but get your act together by tomorrow. It's about, I'm with you and I'll keep staying with you. Or it's I write about a fictional couple. I'll give you a spoiler alert.
Yep.
They're based on my mom and dad. I do a whole chapter about reciprocal caregiving. And my mom's name was Elizabeth June, and my dad's name was Ernest Lionel. He wouldn't want me to be telling you that, but that was his middle name. And so I wrote about Lionel and June. And they weren't my parents, but there was a lot of what happened in there. And that in Lionel's case, he may, the character that I was writing about, he had dementia, which could be a lot of things. And he and June were older people. They were not getting the care. They were living on their own, but there was no money for respite. And sometimes Lionel didn't know who, where he was. And people said to June this, June, you're a brick. You're the strongest lady I know. Lionel is so blessed to have you. And let us know if you need anything. You see, that isn't what you say to someone, just do. Now, lots of people, in my case, that wasn't my parents' situation, but it was inspired by what my mom was feeling. And yeah, mom got way too many baked goods. We had to give a lot of them away.
Wow.
But the thing is, it's that people showing that they care and just show up for that person and or say, do you want to go to the movies? And I'll take whatever it is. Because when you say to someone, if you need help, let me know, what you're saying, what they sometimes hear is, oh, I can't cut it. I can't cut it. I guess they know that. And I believe that that is the path to victimhood and in any way. And if you leave someone a victim, doesn't mean that people aren't victimized. But if it's this a certain model of charity where, back remember well, I don't know if you read Little Women, favorite of mine when I was a child.
I did.
And okay, good. And one of the sisters, and it may have been Beth, but I'm not sure, said, we must always remember the poor. Well, actually, what we should really do is come up, get out of the way, give people the resources that they need and support when they tell you what they need. And I don't know what I'm not going to say it's a human tendency, because it probably isn't, because to want to help is really good, and to care and to be there for people in a crisis. And they don't have to be your family. Wouldn't you want someone to take care of your child if they were the other side of the world? And that's what we do. And that's what our responsibility is. But I did make a point in the book from the beginning, no victimhood. I'm not going to write about people. I interviewed over 150 people, and a lot of the people in there had gone through incredible trials, and it's how did they get through, and how do they change other lives simply by the example of their own. But it's not about saying I feel really, really good today because I went out and helped some needy people. It should be, I feel really good today because I was useful in my life. And I hope that tomorrow I can do that too. But it's about empowering or giving people tools for their own empowerment, which I really is probably the most long-winded answer you've ever had. I'm so sorry, but that's how the circle comes around for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a helpful perspective in so many ways too. I mean, even as you're sharing those anecdotes, I think so often, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's so hard for people to actually put themselves in someone else's circumstance or to really have empathy. And so that natural reaction, let me know if there's anything I can do, without actually realizing how that's impacting the person. So again, I mean, just in your work and in your book, it's so encouraging to hear how informed this has been from what you've seen in other people, but then conversation, interviews, and all those things, even as you've talked with people who've gone through trauma, and just been able to see that shift between not continuing to put them in the victim box. Because even in talking with a lot of those individuals, even as people will talk about being able to survive and even move through those challenges without having people always remind, oh, you're a victim, you're a victim, you're a victim. So to hear how you've incorporated that and how you're really elevating voices and teaching, I think it all comes back to teaching as well, because teaching all of us how to be able to engage with different individuals in different walks of life in a way that supports them and helps all of us thrive, without just, again, because we naturally kind of put people in boxes so we can try and understand without really taking time to listen. And with all the topics that you touch on, I mean, I'm just even thinking about the work of your center and how, I mean, you're touching on so many different aspects. You talked about poverty, you've talked about, aspects of the environment and climate change and belonging in academic science. Like, it still feels like it's a wide range of things, but there are a lot of themes that tie it all together as well.
And forced migration, refugees, and we're doing although I won't be there, I should say most of my colleagues to start the center, they were all my students at the time, or graduating, and what do they do for the summer. And I thought, I got to start something. That's how it happened.
Wow,
I got to start something. This is how to build a global movement on belonging. So this week,
that's great.
In Montreal, Canada, they're doing a something that helps homes and havens, and it's bringing together a lot of groups. Everything we do is in collaboration and partnership, working on on a better welcome, a real welcome. And this is for asylum seekers coming across the US border into Canada. And I was reading an article Sunday, the Sunday New York Times, one of my regular weekly reads, and it was about someone writing from the perspective of being an immigrant to Canada and feeling that once you're, and I love my country, and I know but everyone can do better. Yeah. And so it's not just what happens when you first arrive. It's about what happens ongoing. And when you're trying to find a school, you're trying to find a job, you're trying to find your way around the subway station, but also it's really about people that have been through that experience mentoring one another. That's what I mean. To me, it's more than enough for a life to be constantly working at how to hold this space for people. And I also think about design and belonging, and I don't know if you've talked about the way we can design our spaces for belonging. And someone in my book who's a noted placemaking architect, Dominic Richards from the UK, said something, when someone says something, you say, oh, I wish I said that. But he said that. And he said, either you design for belonging or you will end up with isolation. And then I've been thinking about, it's the way we design communities. It's when we look at isolation, which for me inherently has an absence of choice and an absence of agency and voice. What does that mean? Really, well, you and I could be sitting, well, I meant my kitchen table, but let's say we were sitting in a boardroom and some people that had never been in that room or in that dialogue, they're being included that day. Well, we can get you a seat at the table. Doesn't mean you're included that day unless you're really part of the conversation and you are being heard and you're not just being asked to contribute for another tick box, but actually asked to meaningfully contribute. And the next time you shouldn't be at the boardroom, you need to be out in the community. So I envision belonging as that way of wholeness. And maybe I could just take a slight detour, if I may. Okay, I want to, it's a faith detour, but I want to share an idea. A few months ago in the UK at Oxford University, it was something that I'd wanted to do. And I knew that I had a platform on an afternoon, and how would I use it? And my mentor there actually is a world-class economist, Sabina Alkire. She's also an Episcopal priest, and I happen to be Anglican, which is the same so it's pretty great. And I said to her, Sabina, what I want to do with that afternoon is I want to talk about faith. And I said, when I interviewed 157 people, and I asked people about their belonging, and I knew that some of the people of many different faiths were people of faith. I only 2 people ever answered about that. One, of course, was the Franciscan monk. And it's why, what are we stigmatizing that? Because when we put things kind of down at the bottom of a well, we don't mean to, but if that's where they are, then that affects our gaze on everything. So I want to talk about faith. And so thanks to my mentor, a wonderful Catholic bishop who's also he's also a Trappist monk named Father Eric Varden, who's the Bishop of Norway. And he came, and he'd written a couple of books about loneliness. Anyway, I was almost not quite as nervous as when I met Nelson Mandela, because here we are. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's the Sheldonian Theater, and it's medieval and designed by Christopher Wren, and talk about imposter syndrome. What was I thinking? And I get up there. Yeah. 5 minutes later, why am I still here? But anyway, because of Father Eric, there were a lot of callers in the room and priests and so on. This just could go horribly wrong. But anyway, that wasn't what I wanted to tell you. That just came out. So I spoke, and then Father Eric spoke, and then there was a moderated conversation, and I think it went quite well. But one of the things that he talked about was hospitality And hospitality, I hadn't really thought of it in terms of faith. And he talked about it. He'd lived, well over a decade in a monastery.
Oh, wow.
And he talked about in the tradition, in the monastic tradition, that when somebody comes to the monastery, they're lost, they're not lost. He said they may have the most muddy boots. They're come right on in as you are. And that it's not just considered, I'm sorry to paraphrase Father Richard, because it would have been better coming from him, but I just want to give you the idea that this was part of their faith, to welcome the stranger in. And then of course the stranger is no longer a stranger. And when I think about this, when you just now were speaking about empathy, and I've been thinking about how empathy, it's like resilience. I think some of us are born with more than others, but we can learn. But that empathy doesn't mean I have to have the experience that you have in order to appreciate what you have.
Yeah.
I think it's about hospitality, which I'm giving you the Christian tradition. I think this would be in so many other great traditions, of course. But it's a little bit like, I welcome you in because I don't welcome you in because I'm going to learn this or you're this, or I may even dislike you. I am welcoming you in. That's my faith.
So powerful. Especially that last piece.
I don't dislike you.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. But it's that feeling. And I'm not saying that I'm there where Father Eric is, but it's all a journey. And so I'm much more, I have a different view about what hospitality means. That's not selective. That's our mission.
Yeah. I'm even just sitting with that too. So I'm thinking, that approach and how powerful and world changing that would be if we all incorporate that, and how it would just open up so many other doors for having space to listen and to try and understand. I mean, especially still sitting with the dislike part in the midst of disliking.
Yeah, and not be afraid.
I still welcome you.
Not be afraid to get it wrong, because we can get it wrong. We can use the wrong with words. Words are powerful, and sometimes that's great for communicating. And sometimes if you get one word that you did that wasn't your intention, but someone takes it that way, and then you're kind of like, oh no, I can't be here. Let's not be afraid to get it wrong, because if you care, you will get it right. Those other things slip away. You'll get it right. And the stranger should never, ever be received as as less than, or doing you a favor. It's like that's what fables and myth are full of that. Who comes is supposed to come. And I think that doesn't make empathy any less important. It just means that there's other ways to get to this place, not only one way.
That's so good. I mean, so much rich context and things that we can just even try and apply as well. A slight pivot, because as you've been talking, I've been thinking just about all the work that you're doing. I mean, you've been focusing on othering for quite a while, focusing on belonging, even before this was talked about more generally. I guess from a perspective question, where do you see things going? Because, in so many ways in our society, it seems that there are certain topics that have their moment, even though many like you continue to work on that. And so do you feel, not to put you in the box as we're talking about not putting people in boxes, but I'm wondering if you feel optimistic or pessimistic about these important practices that you're applying and studying, continuing to be focused on, or whether you have concerns that things will kind of shift back, as they do often, to where they were pre-pandemic or any other. So I know that's a very that's a wide open question.
No, it's a good wide open question. When I just kind of by way of background, and then coming into your question. So when I look at belonging and what the inherent right is. I call it an inherent right or a birthright, is that every one of us, by simple virtue of the fact that we are born, have a right to belong. And that really came up through a process of contemplation. I didn't sit down to figure out to write that. That came up, and it really guides me. So we know from remember Maslow's hierarchy, you know, belongingness is in there. It's not number one, but it's in there as a need. We know to belong is a human need, but I envision it as a right, and not exactly as let's add a new right to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Gosh, humanity's having enough trouble living up to the ones that are there. So a friend of mine called Ken Roth, who until quite recently was the head of Human Rights Watch, and he gave me this idea: Kim, don't think of the right to belong as a new human right. Think of this as a way to lift up a constellation of human rights. And I said, oh, okay, Ken, which ones? He said, well, Kim, pick any of them. And so I want to be and clear about this, that it's this, when we talk about whether it's empathy or whether it's hospitality or whatever it is, belonging for me encompasses people, our connection to one another, to place, the lands we live on, the spaces that we inhabit, and also power, which imagination is important in all this too. Can't imagine it, you can't create it. This power, connection, and influence over the systems that govern us, and purpose, a sense of purpose, which I think we've been talking around today anyway, this connection to our personal sense of why. Okay, I just gave you 4 P's, and I gave you 4 words: people, place, power, purpose. You could give me 4 more, you could give me 1. Anyone listening could say, not those ones, this one, because my belonging is going to differ from your belonging. That's okay, as long as we honor one another's. But there's nothing in there that I said that sounds like an ad slogan or whoa, you know, that's what we know this. I believe that we know this. I believe that what's in here is perennial. And I believe that the tendency we get to choose to make someone less than, well, that's perennial too. Whereas loneliness as a concept has only been around for 400 and something years, less than 500 years. I maintain that isolation, along with the absence of agency and choice, well, I think that's been around for a very, very long time. We can go back to the Cyrus cylinder, King Cyrus, and in the ancient world, who abolished slavery. Now, why would that be required unless there already was slavery? We are in human form right now. We're all doing our best, and we're all learning every day. I think what happened is that we just, somewhere along the line, and I'm not pointing to one place, I don't think there is. It's kind of like exercising. So you pick your arms. I'm looking at my arms, wondering when's the last time I worked out with them, but not the point. Thing is, if you don't move your arms, they're going to, the muscle won't be there. And if you don't move them at all, they're going to atrophy. And I feel like compassion is a muscle too. And if we don't work out with that, it's going to go. And I believe that a lot of this is, I don't like to say ancient wisdom, because that sounds forgotten too. It's perennial wisdom. And it's based on the imagination. And it's not for me to say, or you or any of us to say, well, if you had faith in a higher power, that's not, you know, I don't think God tells us what to do. Some people say, who are representing God, think they can tell us what to do. It's about holding the space for our journey. And at the same time, this moment that we're having, well, a few years before COVID, there was, I think it was CNN. I'm not trying to be for or against CNN, but I happen to think that Anderson Cooper, who's on CNN, and he introduced, and I think he's really good about bringing awareness to things. And I remember watching, he was doing a series on loneliness. And I thought, that's good. It wasn't new. but it was good. First of all, anything in a sphere that's considered mental health, which is health writ large, is bringing things out of the shadows is really important. But I also was struck by how many people are like, whoa, loneliness, is that a thing? When I'm thinking, I mean, like, we know that. Okay. So we know that. And then coming forward to COVID, so many people have said to me, I knew you wouldn't appreciate that. So is this because of COVID that, this is having a moment? See, I think I was having a moment from when I was a little kid, even though I had a really good childhood. I never felt like I fit in. And then Dad, Mandela, work, purpose, all of it. But COVID was a moment. If I couldn't call it a moment, gosh, thousands of that. I mean, so many people died. And again, the most physically vulnerable are the ones who are going to die. And then I think was it the lieutenant governor of Texas? This is when I had COVID and I had pneumonia for a long time. And I think it was the lieutenant governor. I can't remember his name, so I'm not going to get you in trouble. Basically said, just like the great generation, it's time for the older ones who get COVID not to seek treatment and leave the space open for the younger ones. And I thought, whoa.
Wow, you had COVID. You're hearing this.
Well, I had pneumonia and I'm thinking, I was thinking, I'm really glad I'm not in Texas today. But the thing is, I don't think many people agreed with him, but the fact is that that was a moment. And it was a moment for nursing homes where all of the atrocities in a lot of them, and by the way, I'm for deinstitutionalization anyway, because it's not human. And there's a lot of other ways to give people opportunities to heal and help and so on. But I'm very much focused about the rights of older people and how a lot of times people don't even see that older people have rights, decisions made for them and so forth. And we know that we all have a right to live in community. So there's your moment. Okay. So a lot of people gave me, and this is so hot, this thing. I'm like, that's not even on my mind. I'm just going on and doing the work that I've always been doing. However, I thought this is good that things are being called out, or like in a lot of places in the world where it was Gracia Michelle, whom I mentioned earlier. She was in a conversation with her through this time when I was sick, but on my way to health again. And we're talking about water, and we were told we were all supposed to wash our hands all the time and wear a mask. And she's from Mozambique and lives in Mozambique and South Africa. And she was talking about in the African continent, how ridiculous this thinking to say that if you can't get a hold of a mask, you're not being a good human being. And there's so many thousands of people who don't have water to drink, let alone go wash their hands. And so this whole, that made me think about if the moment wasn't hard to comprehend. People experience physical isolation that can lead to social isolation. I am not minimizing it. I had to be alone for a long time, and I struggled. It was hard. But once we come through this, what have we learned? What have we learned? What has changed? And so for my part, I also get a question that goes like this: Kim, don't you think that we kind of know all this stuff already? And I'm going to say, do you? Because I don't.
That's a good
response. I don't. Yeah. But here's the thing. Tell me what has changed. And so I'm really hoping that that God gives me a really long and healthy life, because this is what I'll be working on till the day I die. And I know, that expression, never put myself out of a job, but I don't think it matters. I think each one of us, from wherever we are, we just do our part.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point too, I mean, I really liked how you emphasized the learning too, because even in that question, don't we know all this already? It's very easy to say, well, can you show me how we've learned and how we are actually applying these principles? I mean, obviously, there are those that are doing the work, but even as you mentioned, as someone who is doing the work, you're still open to that learning. And so I think even in painting that picture, you've shown where some of the unintentional or intentional short-sightedness comes, assuming that the work is done and not having an eye to the learning that needs to continue.
Sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean
to
interrupt you on your own show. The learning is at the heart heart of it for me,
Mm.
to be open to learning every day and to never give oneself the false impression that, hey, I talk about it, so I got it. There's
Yeah.
so many times I make mistakes and, oh no, I know that when I said that, I just isolated that person, or I did this or that. And, I think it's another thing when I said, like, we kind of have to give ourselves a break too and not be afraid to get it wrong.
Yeah.
It's not trying is way worse, but the learning, I mean, when I mentioned to you about teaching, see, that's a learning environment for me. Whenever I go somewhere, it's that I just want to get really to be really be the best I can be about holding this space.
Mm-hmm.
Don't own it. I'm here to learn too. The only thing that I've learned is, unlike my childhood and now in my age of wisdom, older age in front of me, what I want to do is to be in that, be part of the team, be part of what's in that circle. When I was a kid and a young adult, I never thought like that. I thought I'm always outside the circle, but I really want to see what's going on over there. Example, this different example, but I could never make a sports team. And I really tried. I just want to be part of the team. And so now I realize that I can work at something and I could be part of it too.
Wow, that's so good. And there's so many pearls of wisdom that you've been sprinkling throughout this conversation that I think our listeners are definitely going to appreciate that and even go back and listen to. And just that perspective, I mean, to be honest, it's also, as a host, it's encouraging for me to be able to host someone like you who is, in a sense, at the forefront of a lot of this work, all the work, and still has that mindset of learning and helping us all move forward together. So that's really refreshing. Just to close out, the time has gone so fast, but I'm wondering just what gives you hope, and any not last in terms of the finality, but at least for this conversation, thoughts you want to leave our listeners with. Also not an easy question.
No, I've never not had hope. That's what I was thinking. When I was as a kid, a very early reader, and loved poetry and fell in love with with William Blake and the songs of innocence, songs of experience, because it helped me. They still help me to explain that you can have, there's not like good over here and bad over here, that we're all somewhere. It's a continuum all the time. And it kind of, something came to me as a kid, which I didn't really understand as a kid, but it came to me of you can be sad. You can be sad any day, but always hold the joy. And that it's not a contradiction. And so when I think about what gives me hope, is it okay if it's a bit corny?
Yeah.
Just what it is. New life gives me hope. I believe new life, babies are being born and gardens grow, and I get to, could you imagine if I wasn't here tomorrow after what I'm about to say? Whoa, I get to wake up tomorrow and have a new day. And people give me hope, and faith gives me hope, and the sanctity of life gives me hope. And my sister, who I haven't mentioned yet, my sister Tammy, who died at age 47, and she was we were 11 months apart.
Wow.
And Tammy didn't, and she was my at her funeral, we always say to her, you're the best, maybe not as teenagers, but as then mothers and well into adulthood, you're the best sister in the world. No, you're the best sister in the world. And when at her funeral, I said, and you are the best sister in the world. And now you can't say anything back. But I think about, Tammy didn't get to see her kids, Lisa and Michael, graduate high school. She didn't get to see them go on from there and into adulthood. She won't see where their lives go. If she gets to become a grandma, I know that she'll see it from somewhere. But that was my same age sister and my angel. And so I think every day at the end of Tammy's life, we knew that there were no more miracles. She had a cancer that had metastasized. There was no more miracle drug. We were there, but there was one more pill, one more something that was going to have a lot of side effects. It was a trial that she could take, but the doctor said, Tammy, this is going to be I'll have a lot more side effects. And she said to the doctor, was at Sloan, we'd gone to Sloan Kettering, and she said, "Doctor, I don't care about that. I just want to be here." And
Wow.
so there's my hope is for Tammy to keep on living and try to make things a little better for people, and to fulfill my potential, whatever that is. There's my hope.
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you again for just that. I mean, that's such a poignant quote from your sister, and just the importance. I mean, it really ties in, as I'm thinking everything we've talked about in this conversation, all of it together. And again, just appreciate just how honest and real you've been about those pieces, and how, your motivations and everything that's guided you along the path so far, and that you're continuing to do. And that it really is going to stick with me. I just want to be here. And how powerful that is for all of us who are still here and can continue to do that.
We're here.
Yeah. Wow. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I feel like maybe just the beginning of things to come in the future, as well, as we've been able to hear about some of our common interests and things like that. And just have appreciated just your level of honesty and candor, your insights, all the pieces you've talked about in terms of mentorship. That's definitely a theme that's come through, even though we didn't highlight that as much as well. But I know that our listeners are really going to appreciate listening to this. I imagine they may have to go back and re-listen again because of all the wisdom and insight that you shared along the way. So Kim, again, thank you so much for being here on the Addy Hour podcast, and for all that you're continuing to do.
Well, thank you. It's been a blessing for me to be here, and you gave me so much empathy and warmth and welcome that you actually made this very pleasant. So I thank you too.
My pleasure.